Story 1. The crisp October air bit at my exposed cheeks as I trudged through the fallen leaves, their crackling a counterpoint to the rhythmic thump of my heart. Hunting season in the Adirondacks. A tradition passed down from my grandfather, a ritual I cherished. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled my lungs, a familiar comfort. This year, I'd convince my brother, Liam, to join me. "Think we'll bag anything bigger than a squirrel this time, David?" Liam's voice, laced with friendly mockery, broke the silence. I grinned. "Patience, little brother. Patience." We continued deeper into the woods, sunlight dappling through the canopy. Liam chatted about his new job in the city, his words a soothing drone against the backdrop of the wilderness. Around midday, we reached our usual spot, a small clearing overlooking a ravine. "Let's set up camp here," I suggested, unloading our gear. The afternoon passed uneventfully. We built a small fire, ate our sandwiches, and shared stories. As dusk crept in, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, an unsettling quiet descended. Liam shivered. "Getting cold," he muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. "Maybe we should head back." "Just a little longer," I insisted, my gaze fixed on the darkening woods. A strange feeling had settled over me, a prickling awareness that we weren't alone. The first sign was the sound. A low, guttural growl, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. I dismissed it as my imagination, the product of too many campfire stories. But then, Liam heard it too. "What was that?" he whispered, his face pale in the firelight. "Probably just an animal," I said, trying to sound confident, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The growling returned, closer this time, deeper and more menacing. It was accompanied by a rustling in the undergrowth, the snapping of twigs. Something was moving towards us, something large. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped me. We grabbed our rifles, the metal cold against our trembling hands. The fire, our only source of light, flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed around us. The rustling grew louder, closer. We could hear heavy breathing now, a wet, rasping sound that made my stomach churn. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes pierced the darkness, fixated on us from the edge of the clearing. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, huge, predatory, and filled with an unnerving intelligence. A low growl rumbled from the shadows, vibrating through the ground. "What is that?" Liam whispered, his voice choked with terror. I didn't know. I'd hunted these woods my entire life, and I'd never seen anything like it. The creature stepped into the firelight, revealing a monstrous form. It was bipedal, towering over us, its thick, matted fur the color of dried blood. Its limbs were long and sinewy, ending in clawed hands that scraped against the ground. Its head was elongated, with a snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. But it was the eyes that held me captive, those burning red orbs, filled with a chilling, ancient malice. We raised our rifles, our fingers tightening on the triggers. But we hesitated. Something about this creature, its sheer size and power, instilled a primal fear, a paralyzing dread. We knew, instinctively, that our weapons were useless against it. The creature let out another ear-splitting growl, and the ground trembled beneath its feet. It took a step closer, its eyes never leaving us. We were trapped, cornered like prey. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stopped. It tilted its head, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the woods, seemingly from far away. The creature's eyes widened, its gaze shifting to the darkness beyond the clearing. And then, it turned and vanished back into the shadows, leaving us alone in the flickering firelight, our hearts pounding in our chests. We remained frozen, our rifles still raised, for what felt like an eternity. The silence of the woods was broken only by the crackling fire and our ragged breathing. Finally, Liam lowered his rifle, his face ashen. What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to speak. I didn't know. But I knew one thing, the woods had changed. Something dark and terrifying had entered them, and it was still out there. We didn't sleep that night. We huddled around the dying embers of the fire, our rifles clutched tightly in our hands, listening to every rustle, every snap, every whisper of the wind. As dawn broke, painting the sky in pale shades of grey, we packed our gear and fled the woods, never looking back. We haven't spoken about it since. We haven't returned to the woods. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that low, guttural growl in my dreams. And I see those burning red eyes, watching me from the darkness. I know it's still out there, waiting. And I fear what it might be waiting for. Story 2. Story 2, The Whispering Pines. The crisp October air bit at my exposed skin as I trudged through the fallen leaves, their earthy scent mingling with the sharp tang of pine. Hunting season. A yearly ritual passed down from my grandfather, a tradition I'd embraced since I was a boy. This year, I'd chosen a remote section of Blackwood Forest, an area my grandfather always warned me against. Bad things linger there, boy, he'd say, his voice low and grave. But I dismissed his warnings as old wives' tales. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the woods, I started to understand his unease. My phone showed no signal. Damn! I should have told Sarah which area I'd be in. A nagging feeling began to creep into me, a sense of being watched. I scanned the silent woods, the wind whispering through the towering pines like spectral voices. A rustle in the undergrowth made me jump, rifle instinctively raised. Just a squirrel. I let out a shaky breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The deepening twilight transformed the familiar woods into something alien and menacing. The trees seemed taller, their branches gnarled and reaching, like skeletal fingers clawing at the darkening sky. The shadows danced and writhed, taking on the forms of grotesque creatures. My senses sharpened, every snap of a twig, every sigh of the wind, amplifying my growing anxiety. Then, I heard it. A low, guttural growl, emanating from somewhere deep within the woods. I froze, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint the source. It came again, closer this time, accompanied by the distinct sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Deer? Bear? Whatever it was, it sounded bigger, more malevolent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, to abandon my rifle and run as fast as I could. But something held me rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity mixed with a primal fear. I moved slowly, cautiously, my rifle gripped tight in my hand. The growling intensified, closer now, along with the snapping of branches and the crunching of leaves. I could smell it too, a musky, acrid odor that made my stomach churn. It wasn't animal. It was something else. Something wrong. Suddenly, a pair of luminous eyes, glowing an unnatural shade of green, appeared in the darkness between the trees. They were huge, much larger than any animal I'd ever encountered. They stared at me, unblinking, filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence. I raised my rifle, my finger trembling on the trigger. A low, chilling whisper echoed through the woods, seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Leave," it hissed, the voice raspy and inhuman. "This is not your place." My breath hitched in my throat. Fear, raw and paralyzing, gripped me. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't even breathe. The eyes blinked, and then they were gone, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. The growling ceased. The snapping branches fell silent. I stood there, frozen in terror, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The woods were silent again, but the silence was heavier now, laden with a palpable sense of dread. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wasn't alone. Something was out there, watching me, waiting. Slowly, I lowered my rifle, my hand shaking so violently I could barely hold it. I turned and ran, not caring which direction I was going, driven by a primal instinct to escape. I stumbled through the darkness, branches whipping at my face, leaves crunching under my boots. I didn't stop running until I burst through the tree line and into a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, my lungs burning, my body trembling. I looked back at the dark, imposing wall of trees, expecting to see the glowing eye staring back at me, but there was nothing. Just the silent, whispering pines. I finally managed to find my way back to my truck, the drive home a blur of fear and adrenaline. I never told anyone what I saw that night. I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd say it was my imagination, the product of an overactive mind and the isolation of the woods. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. It's been months now, and I haven't been back to Blackwood Forest. I can't. The memory of those eyes, that voice, that chilling presence, still haunts me. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees outside my window, I hear it again, that low, guttural growl, followed by a whisper. Leave. I haven't been hunting since. I don't think I ever will again. Because I know, deep down, that something is still out there, waiting in the shadows of the whispering pines. And it's waiting for me to return. Story 3. Story 3, The Antler Harvest. The crisp October air bit at my exposed skin, the scent of pine needles and damp earth clinging to my worn hunting jacket. The Allegheny National Forest, normally a place of solace, felt different this year. Uneasy. Dad, bundled beside me in his blaze orange, hummed an off-key rendition of Ring of Fire as we hiked deeper into the woods. Think we'll bag a 10-pointer this year, son? He asked, his voice roughened by years of Marlboros. Hope so, I replied, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. The uneasiness was growing, a cold pit in my stomach. Something felt off. We reached our usual hunting spot, a small clearing overlooking a valley thick with brush. The setting sun cast long, eerie shadows, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien. As we settled in, I noticed a strange, pulsing sound, faint but persistent, like a distant heartbeat. I dismissed it as the blood rushing in my ears. Hear that? Dad asked, his gaze fixed on the tree line. I shook my head, though the pulsing was intensifying. Hear what? He shrugged. Thought I heard something, never mind. Hours passed. Darkness deepened, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The pulsing grew stronger, rhythmic and oppressive. My skin began to crawl. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows. Something large. Something wrong. Dad, I whispered, my voice tight with fear. There. He squinted, peering into the darkness. Where? The movement ceased. The pulsing stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, descended. I thought I saw something, I stammered, feeling foolish. Dad chuckled. Nerves getting to you, son. It's just the shadows playing tricks. But the shadows hadn't played tricks. I knew it. We stayed another hour, but the unease was too much. We packed up and started back, the forest now a claustrophobic maze of darkness. The pulsing returned, louder than before, accompanied by a faint, sickeningly sweet smell. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, then growing louder, closer, circling us. They weren't words, but sounds, wet and guttural, like something choking. Dad froze, his face pale in the moonlight. Did you hear that? He whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. The whispers intensified, weaving around us a chorus of unseen horrors. We quickened our pace, the whispers chasing us through the trees. The sweet smell grew stronger, cloying, nauseating. My head began to spin. Suddenly, Dad stumbled, letting out a choked cry. He clutched at his chest, his face contorted in pain. Dad! I cried, rushing to his side. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed a trembling finger towards the trees. I followed his gaze and saw them. Figures. Tall, gaunt figures silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Their heads were different. Enormous, branching antlers, pulsing with a sickly green light. The same light that pulsed beneath their skin, visible through the gaps in their ragged clothing. The pulsing. The whispers. The smell. It was coming from them. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching us, their antlered heads tilted in an unnatural way. The air crackled with a strange energy. Then Dad screamed. A high-pitched, inhuman scream that ripped through the night. He clutched at his face, his fingers digging into his skin, his eyes bulging. His skin, it was changing. Becoming translucent, revealing the pulsing green light beneath. Small, bony protrusions began to emerge from his forehead, pushing through the skin, growing, branching. I stumbled back, horror freezing me in place. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The sweet smell was overwhelming, choking me. I could feel the strange energy coursing through the air, tingling on my skin. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the darkness, the screams of my father echoing in my ears, the whispers chasing me, the antlered figures looming in my mind. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know where I am now. The whispers have faded, but the pulsing remains, a constant throb in my head, in my chest, everywhere. The sweet smell lingers, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my bones. And sometimes, when I look in the reflections in puddles or streams, I think I see changes. Small, bony protrusions, just starting to emerge. I keep running. But I just know, they're still out there. Watching. Waiting. And the antlers are calling.